Hello, hello. Welcome to day 3 of the 5-day podcast challenge. Let's get started. We have so much to cover. Welcome to the 5-day podcast challenge, day 3. Day 3. Like I said earlier, we've already covered a lot about your goals and your topic. Now, today, we're going to talk about naming your podcast. And like I said, you will probably have very specific questions when it comes to name. So put them in the comments now. We will go back and grab those during our Q&A. But let's just dive right in. So on day 3, as we talk about it and really decide on your podcast name, some of the things that we need to talk about are ways to research a name, what happens if or when you have to rebrand. Oh, it's kind of like the elephant in the room. You really don't want to talk about it, but we need to because it does happen. And the importance of picking a name and moving on. I'm really excited because names are one of those things that's very specific to everyone. And I think that, it's just something we all have to do. We all have to name our podcast before it's actually ready to go out into the world. So I wanted to tell you the magic formula. What is the magic formula for a podcast name? Does it need to be exactly 27 characters? Does it need to include your topic, your name, and your firstborn's name, or all the other bad advice? Because guess what? There is no magic formula. Oh, like wah wah. Please tell me you used to watch like all the game shows. I don't know why The Price is Right just popped into my head, like all the different like sound effects that they would have in the background. But y'all, no, there is no magic formula for me to say, okay, if you put exactly this many characters or you do this for your podcast, then it's going to skyrocket to the top of the charts. None of that. There is no magic formula. So I say that only because if you see someone tell you that there is, run the other way. Run the other way, y'all, because there's no magic formula. All I can do is point you in the direction to really get the creative energy flowing for you to find the best podcast name for you, your show, and your audience, maybe even your industry. But don't fall into the trap of someone telling you there's a magic formula if you just put the word the and podcast and of in there. Okay, we're getting on a tangent, but you know what I mean. So let's talk about ways for you to research a podcast name, knowing that I can't just give you put this in here and then try this and then try this and then let's see if it works. Instead, I'm going to give you practical ways that you can do some research to find a podcast name that will work best for you. So, number 1, this is where you're taking notes. If you're taking notes, this is where it's going to get going. Do you have a current brand or an audience that you want to use it for? So here's a great example. I know many people that create content on other platforms. Maybe you have a blog, maybe you have a YouTube channel, maybe you have a social media account that's not your specific name, it's a dedicated brand name that no one else has. Could you use that as your podcast name? Maybe, maybe not. This won't be an option for everyone, but it's one of those things to consider. And at the end of the day, I think that this is the easiest place to start if you already have an established brand, platform, or audience. Okay, so that's number 1. The second way that I want you to start researching for your podcast name is start exploring keywords, names, and topics that are related to your industry. I'll give you an example. I talk about podcasting, but like we talked about yesterday, podcasting is one of those umbrella topics that have many different subcategories or subtopics underneath it. So when I talk about podcasting, I could talk about podcast marketing. I could talk about podcast monetization. I could talk about podcast strategy. I could talk about podcast launching. Like there's so many nuances to the overarching brand or topic or industry is really not brand, industry or topic of podcasting. So I have to decide where is it that sweet spot that we talked about yesterday with your podcast topic? Where's that sweet spot for incorporating words that are important to your industry, to your topic, and things that aren't already taken? We're going to talk about that here in a little bit because, like I said, that does happen. If somebody's like, I found my name and then it's gone, this definitely happens. So that's another place. And then, y'all, this is the easiest. This is the easiest, and this is where everybody should start. Go to Google, type it in, and literally see if your name is taken. You will be so surprised. Okay, so fun fact about me. I I should say it's a gift. It is a gift of ideation. I have this skill, if you'll call it that, where I have a ton of ideas. But I also call it like a fault of mine because I have a ton of ideas. Y'all, I looked up 3 podcast names in the last month and a half because I thought of another show that I could create. I already have 2 shows. I already have 2 shows, a YouTube channel. I have like so much content already, and I thought of another one. So I can tell you that as someone that constantly is thinking of different ways, different avenues of how I can expand my business, I don't start by just saying, okay, I found a name. I'm gonna like get going. I go to Google first and I see, oh, that name's already out there. Cause I did. I just did a quick Google search and boom, it wasn't an active podcast. Now, and we can talk about that. If anybody has questions, if their name's been taken that they really loved, but it's not active, we can talk about ways to approach that. But when I do a quick Google search, the name pops up. I see it's there. I'm like, okay, I have to get more creative. So do a Google search. And then that's not good enough. That's not, you can't just say, I did my due diligence. No, do a Google search. Then go to the podcast categories of whatever app you listen to, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify, wherever it is, whatever category you want to listen to, or you could just go to the search bar in any of those platforms and type in the name that you're thinking about. If nothing pops up, you might be good to go. If something pops up and you're like, crap, that name is taken, then we got to go back to the drawing board and start thinking of other names. So let me know that y'all are here with me. Say, I get it. Tell me like that makes sense. Tell me in the comments that you're on the same page as me, because I want to make sure that everyone understands the proper ways to go about researching a name, because this is really important. I have a story that we'll get into a little bit later, but I mean, I've had a friend who she got a cease and desist letter and it kind of scared her. Like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? Like, am I getting sued? Like, what's going to happen? It turned out everything was fine, but it can get a little scary if you find out that you're using someone else's name. So you've got to do your due diligence to make sure that you're not using someone else's name that's out there. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Now, I know that this question has already popped up in our group, and someone has asked, well, do I need to include my name? Am I supposed to put my name? Here is my advice. This is what I believe. So I will tell people, well, do you want to put your name in there? It's not a given that you have to include your name, but I will tell you why I have included my name. Okay, my last name really is Proffitt. Yes, I do get asked this on a regular basis. I had a Zoom call yesterday, and it was the first time I was meeting this woman, and she was like, we were wrapping up our session, and at the very end, she was like, is Proffitt really your last name? Like, seriously, like that's the last question. And I just was thinking to myself, she's been sitting here. We've been on the phone for like 30 minutes and she's just now asking me this. Like, she's been wanting to know this the whole time. And she's asking me, is your last name really Proffitt? And I was like, yes, it actually is. But I use my last name because it's a fun play on words. I talk about business and I talk about the business of podcasting. And I love that my last name is Proffitt. It's my husband's last name, but still, right? I'm Crystal Proffitt. Legally, that is my name. And so I really enjoy using it. But you can look at other really big brands that don't use their name at all in their podcast. But then you see other ones that do. So there's no right or wrong. Like it's not this, remember, we don't have a magic formula, right? It doesn't say A plus B plus your name equals the best podcast name out there, or A plus B plus do not put your name in there equals the best podcast name out there. This is up to you. I will tell you that it does get clouded on your podcast artwork if you include your name on there and it's like something with, and then you put your name on there. Unless your name is John Smith, something very, very short, it's going to be hard to put your name on your podcast artwork. That's just speaking from experience and seeing so many different shows. I think that this is where it can get a little clouded. If your name is super, super long, then I would advise you to choose a podcast name that's more related to your topic. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. Let me know. This question was asked as well. Should I put the word podcast or show in the name? And what I was talking about the other day when someone asked this question was, back, I would say like 4 or 5 years ago, I think that it really made sense for people to put, like my show, it's called the Proffitt Podcast. Now, today, if I were renaming my show, I probably wouldn't put the word podcast in there because people know if they go to Apple Podcast, they're listening to a podcast. I think of shows like Armchair Expert, for example. This is one of my other favorite podcasts. If you don't know this already, I have lots. I have several favorite podcasts. This is one of mine. And I think about, they don't have the word podcast in there. They just have, this is the name of their show. And there's other ones that have the name show in it, and they've been around for a long time. So I think that this was kind of a trend for a while for people to have the word podcast or show in the name, but it's not a necessity. So if you already have kind of a long name and you're like, I can't really fit the word podcast, or I can't fit the word show where it rolls off the tongue easily and it's something really easy to say, then I don't think that you need it. So that's just my opinion. That's my advice to you. If you were to come to me and say, do I have to have it? You don't have to have it. But if it feels right to you, then go ahead, go for it. Okay. Um, Look for inspiration. So I love the idea of you going and having this, like maybe a few options, right? If you're someone that's watching this right now, you're watching on the replay and you're like, okay, I have 3 or 4 options that I just cannot nail down which one is my favorite. I would start exploring out kind of into the internet and looking for inspiration on which word speaks best to you. Now, this could be looking at industry articles. It could be listening to podcasts that are also going to be in your category, but it could also be asking family and friends what they think about it. Now, hold up. We need to stop and back up for a second, because there is an issue with asking your friends and your family members their advice on your podcast name because they may not be your ideal listener. Okay, I'm going to say this again because I think we really need to hit this point home. I have a lot of people that come to me and say, well, my friends and my family, like, they're not supportive of my podcast. They probably don't get it because they may not be your ideal listener. So if you go, you take your list of 3 or 4 podcast names and you tell your significant other, or you tell your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your best friend, and they're like, those are all terrible names. Don't take their advice. Take it with a grain of salt because they may not be the person that's going to listen to your show every single week. And if they don't, it's okay. Y'all, my husband does not listen to my podcast. He doesn't. And he asked me, he's like, does that upset you that I don't really listen to your show that much? I'm like, No, why would you? You don't have a podcast. You're not starting a podcast business. You no, it's fine because it's not something that he is doing. So I think it's important if you have no way else to decide on those last few, you're like, I just have these names, I have to decide on it. Ask your friends and family, but also be a little objective that they may not be your ideal listener.